Hi everybody, this is David and welcome to the Module 3 Fireside Chat for Inclusive Classroom Strategies. Again, another very active week in posting. I appreciate that. And I have 5 pages to go through in our chat. Now, it's all large print and most of this is shout outs. So don't click the stop, off, delete, goodbye button quite yet. But I wanted to make sure I was comprehensive in recognizing the work that you've done during Module 2 and talk about Module 3 and you know what we're looking at. So Module 3 runs May 29th through June 4th. And again, continue to be active posters. You've been active posters, but if you happen to go in a discussion thread and you see that someone the 0 hasn't had a post yet, a response, jump in there, and make a response. Of course, I try to do the same, but let's make sure that we're responding to each other. And again, if you haven't posted in 3 or 4 days, I'm going to contact you. So it's okay. I'm not upset, but I want to check in because really you need to be monitoring the course every 3-4 days and posting. I mean, our modules are a week long and things are due. So in addition, make sure that you're making posts when things are due, and up in the heading for each of the discussion threads, for example, if there's a due date, due on whatever, then you need to post by that date. So make sure that you're doing that. And if you haven't been doing that, go back and make the posts that you haven't made, and then, make sure that you're caught up going forward, because once I do start entering grades, which won't be too long, and if you have not made your required posts, then those are going to turn into zeros, and you don't want that to happen. So again, grades haven't been entered yet. Please, you'll see some, you won't see others. And I don't have all grades visible at the moment, but remember to check the announcements thread. I will go in soon, in the next few days probably, and do an update of grades for the first 2 modules to get all of those in. So outstanding work, everybody, with your timelines of inclusion. I like the variety, and those of you who undertook technology that you hadn't used before, like Prezi or something like that, and struggled to possibly link it out or whatever. Hey, good for you for doing that, pushing yourself for universal design for learning, the way that you're demonstrating learning, and that's what you want for your students. And if you can walk those, in those footsteps and say, I tried this. It was kind of clunky or uncomfortable at first, but I got the hang of it, and I'm glad I did it. And I saw a lot of that in the different productions, and some really neat areas addressed. So I'll talk about a couple of those, but I did make a number of responses to the inclusion timelines. But all of you, nice work on your inclusion timelines. I really appreciate the depth that you went into the areas that you explored, the images that you brought to go along with your narrative. So Ro Vargo. We were introduced to Ro Vargo, and when I mentioned this to somebody in a post, one of the things with Ro definitely is the thought of acceptance, with her peers. And I'm going to share a story with you now that has stuck with me for years. I attended a conference, maybe 10 years ago, and there was a dad presenting in a breakout session. And kind of odd, didn't really know why he was there, and it was more of a vague title on the session. But he had, it was well attended, and he was presenting, and he talked about his daughter, and she, maybe 8th grade, freshman, something like that, had cerebral palsy. Her birthday was coming up, and there was a knock on the door. So which is probably going to totally screw up my audio. I've been working on some different audio programs here, worked with a sound technician to improve my radio show, which, by the way, got moved to a better time, up to 2 o'clock. It's now 7 days a week on the 405 Media for those of you who have any interest in following it. So this father, there's a knock at the door. He and his wife answer, and it is two of his daughter's friends from school. And they say, can we come in and talk to you? And at that time, their daughter was somewhere else, some activity or something. She wasn't at the house. And the parents said, yeah. And of course, the dad said, I'm thinking, what's going on here? And they said, well, we want to talk about, like, let's say Charlotte. Charlotte's, birthday's coming up, and we want to talk to you. And immediately the dad is like, oh no, this isn't going to be good. I mean, is it something to do with, the friendships? Are they not attending? Well, it was kind of a get together. Of course, it's not like a big birthday bash when you get older, but it was, it was kind of a get together. And the daughter said, these young ladies said, can we be just frank, honest with you? And then the parents said, yeah, and their mind is just whirling, what's going on? And they said, first of all, like, we love Charlotte, we're her friends, and there's nothing going on with that. Of course, the parents relieved, but they said, Charlotte is a young lady, and you still dress her in the designer sweatpants type clothing. And she likes the Backstreet Boys, but yet, like, she doesn't have any Backstreet Boy stuff in her locker or anywhere else. And, like, a lot of the girls are getting their nails painted and their hair done. And, you kind of do her hair up the same all the time, and her fingernails aren't painted. And not that you don't take care of her, because they were great parents. But they saw Charlotte as the young Charlotte. They never saw her evolving into this young lady. And the two girls said, we want to kind of do this makeover of Charlotte, and we want to ask your thoughts on it, because she's interested in the Backstreet Boys, and we want to work with her to give her different hairstyle and some other things. And the parents paused, and the dad said, they were completely right. These girls were spot on. My wife and I just had never seen that Charlotte was becoming a young lady, and we dressed her in clothes that were more convenient for us. And we just didn't, in the way that we did her hair and other things. We never saw this side of her until her friends pointed this out. So the dad talks about what happened. They have this kind of makeover party, and the mom goes and buys, at that time it was on TV, you probably remember this, but it was called the Bedazzler, and this thing would put rhinestones on anything like jeans or whatever. It was big on TV. Charlotte loved these rhinestone type things. So the mom bought the Bedazzler, a whole bunch of the fake rhinestones, and they got a pair of jeans for Charlotte because she hadn't worn jeans. They always had her in these kind of, workout pants type things. And they bedazzled these jeans like crazy. And they got her like a Backstreet Boys, like shirt or sweatshirt or something. And her friends came over and they did up her hair and her fingernails. And she had on her wheelchair, and her dad showed pictures of this, but it was like a translucent tray that was on the front. Or not, it was transparent. I mean, you could see through it. And her friends took a poster, Backstreet Boys poster, cut it out, and then they used contact paper to put it up so it was on the bottom side of this. So as you look down, you had the Backstreet Boys. And they kind of tweaked out a few other little details and trinkets and stuff like that. And Charlotte was ecstatic and had her fingernails done. And her dad at this breakout session talked about what that meant for inclusion for Charlotte, and the fact just that he and his wife had totally just missed out on that. They weren't looking at that until, again, Charlotte's friends brought that to their attention. But they were saying, yeah, Charlotte really wasn't being able to express herself, and also, wasn't. It was kind of becoming, I wouldn't say as much a barrier to inclusion, but it wasn't moving her along with being able to express herself, which was a very inclusive culture for youth of her age, to express their interest in music and bands and other things and clothing and styles and whatever. So, but Ro Vargo reminds me, every time I read that, reminds me of sitting a few rows back watching this dad present, and just this talk from the heart about how, the day his daughter's friends came over and kind of enlightened him to the fact that his little girl had grown up, and he needed to treat her as a young adult, and boy, I mean, it was really moving. But yes, the bedazzler, that was a funny part. Everybody laughed because he said, they kind of went crazy, and these jeans were just, there's rhinestone like all over the place, but Charlotte, loved them, and it's just kind of cool. So, let's talk about module 3. So we have the inclusion and the other kids document. I have a very poorly working orange highlighter right here. Inclusion and the other kids document. When you read that, I think I want to bring in awareness. It's very easy to become the other. And actually, that's it's a very distinct political strategy to try to create an other and to marginalize an other. But it just becomes easy to do that, to become the other. And we see this. I'm gonna step outside of kind of this discussion of inclusion a little bit, but one of the things that happens after a school shooting, and I know this empirically from my research, my doctoral research and other, but a large number of people in the community, and even within school boards and staff, will be very receptive to some type of hypothetical screener to identify potential future school shooters. And first of all, something does not exist. There's not a profile of a school shooter. And if you did try to profile out who you thought could bring harm to others, who are you going to profile out in a high school? You're probably going to profile out the goth, the kids who are dressing in black and goth, because you're going to think that they're counterculture and they might pose some threat. And it's your at-risk kids, and those students you're receiving at-risk services, or students who present as goth have no higher probability of bringing harm to self or others than the general school population. That is statistically accurate. But that's who you're going to identify. So this whole thing of the other really gets to be a tricky topic to deal with. I brought up where, I believe all students are regular education. Some students are regular ed and special ed. And I think that's a good way to look at things. In this module, I have an interview. I have my module up over here, so three monitors. And I have an interview with Greg Vandehay. It was a few years ago. It's still very relevant. I just talked to someone who returned from China after spending a semester teaching there. And we talked about his experiences, and they're very similar to what Greg shares in this interview. What is fascinating in China, for example, is you can't buy your way into inclusion. And, Greg will talk about how if you have a child with a disability, first, disabilities aren't really diagnosed formally in China. It's not like they have so many students with learning disabilities and autism. I mean, that of course that exists within the population. It's just like that those diagnoses just are not given out. But you could have. I asked Greg a pointed question of saying, if you were a government official and you had $1 million and you said, I will pay for the teacher and pay for the aide, plus like make this contribution to the school every year my child is there, public school, would they allow my child to attend if my child had a disability? And he said, no, you cannot buy your way in. It's so strong culturally to not incorporate students with disabilities into schools. Now, actually, in this interview, Greg talks about a breakthrough that he helped facilitate with one student with a disability having access to schools. So, it's a fascinating interview. I also have a recent interview which I posted from February of 2017 with David Hyde, he's a coworker of mine, and actually I worked with David in a previous work setting also. And David's blind, and he shares many very fascinating stories from being a child all the way up to present. And I use David. This was part of now I have a show, the Safety Dog Podcast, which is aired now 7 days a week out of Los Angeles on a radio show. And this is part of it. So, but I received a lot of feedback from this show, and a lot of, it was interesting, and you'll watch and you can decide, you'll have your own visceral reactions, and then you can have your second order thinking of, why do you feel the way you do? But I had as many people email me about this and say that they cried after watching it, and as many people who said that they felt, really empowered and happy and appreciative for this. So this wide range. I also had a lady contact me who was in her 20s, blind, and used a service animal or guide dog to help her navigate. And she very much appreciated this story and was talking about some of her, had emailed me and some of how using a service animal had helped her become more inclusive, have a more inclusive experience in society. And David talks about when he was younger and in one of his work settings of actually bench pressing his service dog out the window of a prison that he worked at during a fire drill onto, like a outdoor staircase thing, and then, of course, bringing the dog back in. So when the drill was done. But the Dave Hyde interview, I think, has many points of reflection for inclusion, and it's very personal to me because I know Dave. And when I interact, I mean, I'm in contact with Dave several times a week, and I never think of him as a blind man. I mean, but when I first met Dave, I remember I was apprehensive. I had questions of how to, and this will come out in some of the shout outs, but even how to interact with Dave, I just didn't know. I mean, I didn't grow up with anyone in my school that was visually impaired or blind. And now, Dave and I are, good friends. I mean, and we have good humor. And so I'm thankful for that opportunity to get to know him and through that work setting, but also the fact that it wasn't something where I allowed my anxiety to continue to be a barrier where it would have kept me from getting to know this really interesting guy. And you'll see, this interview is a lot of fun with Dave. We laugh a lot, and the stories he tells, I think are really insightful and entertaining, but very much reflect upon inclusive practices. And also we have Sevanna's story. Sevanna is a high school student attending Toma High School. And Toma High School has a very well-developed AV club, and they also do like the news with their, the student, they have a student video club, and they do the news and broadcast that out. Very well done. And so Sevanna's story, I believe, is an awesome idea for disability awareness and self-advocacy. It also puts Sevanna in that role of leadership and an ambassador for the disability area that she's representing, which I believe, after watching Sevanna's story, it's a pretty rare condition. But also, there's this feeling too of, if that was my daughter, how would I feel about her presenting? And I think I would feel proud, that she was presenting in the way that Toma did that. This was very very well done and positioned Sevanna definitely as a role model and someone to inform other students and to take away this thing of, if you're Savannah's classmate or if you're another high school student, it's like, I don't understand what's going on with Sevanna. I mean, that's the high school kid saying that. And you watch this video and it's like, okay. And yeah, she's cool. I get this. And this really helped me. So it's just another strategy that you can use to help break down that initial barrier, which is anxiety, which is there because people don't know. They have questions. They don't know. What they don't know, they fear, or they're just apprehensive of, or they just want to kind of stay away from. And hats off to Toma for putting this together. And you could do this at your school too. I mean, this could be done at middle school. This could be done at high school. You could do this at elementary, I suppose. But this was led by the student video club at the high school. And there's other students, but it's not, just don't focus on students with disabilities. I mean, it's a wide range of different things, but they did showcase a few students, and one was Sevanna, and I think it's really well done. Discussion question 2 is due Friday, June 2nd, which is my 15th wedding and my 15th year wedding anniversary. So 15th? No, that's wrong. 16th. So 16th, yes, married June 2nd, 2001. I remember that because we were able to do our honeymoon to Vegas and tour the Hoover Dam when there was virtually like no security whatsoever. I remember, again, that was prior to September 11th, 2001, going through the Hoover Dam on the tour. And it was like one tour guide, maybe 20, 25 people, and we were kind of toward the back. And you'd walk past control panels, and there'd be nobody there. And there'd be tools and levers and switches and stuff. And I'm like thinking to myself, I don't know about this. I mean, this seems a little too lax. But I know it's not that way anymore. But yeah, I'll never forget that tour of thinking, I could go over here and pull a couple levers and, block out Las Vegas. I wouldn't do that, of course, but I mean, it was just it's really weird. It was the honor system, but it's the way it was back then, and, it did work. So, June 2nd, though, there's a discussion question, what rationale compels you? So I'm not trying to convince you to adopt this like full inclusion, must inclusion mindset. I'm trying to educate you to understanding the terminology of inclusion, some different ways to look at inclusion, taking first order thinking, which is being able to define inclusion, and second order is to say like why, why do we, why do we have students included in our schools, students with disabilities, not how we do it, which is first order. This is how we do it with classrooms and special programs. But like why do we do this? So what ultimately I want you to hopefully come out of this with is understanding least restrictive environment. And that is a range under the Individuals with Disability Education Act, meaning a very restrictive environment to which is the students who could be educated off-site. And when I was special education director, we had some students we educated off-site at an off-site placement or a residential facility, because that was the best way to meet their needs. Was it expensive? Yes, but that was the best way to meet their needs. And you have to have this range of options available, least restrictive environment, and ask those questions at the IEP team meeting of what are the options. And you always start, though, this is the thing, no matter where the student's at, you always start the discussion with, okay, let's consider full inclusion in the regular education classroom. And then, okay, if we can't do that, and there's justification given, X, Y, Z, whatever, what's the next step? And can we make that happen? Okay. And we talk, and what's the next step? And you find out where you can make that happen. But you have the discussion with every meeting. And what happens too much is you get comfortable with what the status quo is. It's like, well, they're being served in the pull-out classroom and it seems to be working. So let's just go with it. Let's just copy this IEP and we'll put it in place for the next year. No. Have the discussion of saying, can we introduce a least restrictive environment, which is going to be different than what the child has now, which might be that they have 25-40% of their school day in the regular education setting. And can we put the supports in place to do that? And if can we give it a try? Things like that. So, but to really be a champion for a least restrictive environment, in that when you talk about placement, you talk about options for kids. There's a section on the IEP, it's the I-5, I believe, where you have to indicate the placements that were considered. And actually, as an expert witness in legal cases, I go to that now and then in legal cases, and I'll say, I don't see that it was documented that there were multiple considerations of placement. Even if there was more than one, there's only one documented here. Now that's a little tricky because that gets into things like due process and stuff like that, which I deal more procedurally with district things and stuff like that. But that is something I do look at. So, all right, it is shout out time. Dun, 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 dun. Shout outs. All right, Sherry, you had a response to a Roe Vargo discussion question, and you mentioned that a teacher, this is from you, a teacher I worked with once did something with her special needs kids to promote acceptance, which could be another idea that might have helped Roe. And this teacher has had her students pick 2 kids from their grade to invite to eat lunch with twice a week in a separate place. So they get to pick kind of some special lunch friends and do a special lunch. I think that's a great idea to build. Again, you're empowering those students. You're giving them power. You're talking about, giving those students with special needs, empowering them, and also opportunities to build some friendships and at least getting to know some other kids and letting other kids get to know them. We do something similar where I'm at, Wisconsin School for the Blind. It's called Badger Bistro, where which is new, and it's students who then can invite friends into kind of a special area in the lunchroom, and it's done up. It's kind of separated out from the other area physically, and it's almost like a little restaurant within a restaurant. And it is for social purposes of building social relationships, and using that lunchtime to do that. So I think that's a really neat idea that you shared there, Sherry. So I appreciate that. Patrick, you wrote, my first main thought was something you mentioned in response to somebody's post I forgot whose, that all students are regular education and some are also special education. So yeah, it said that. I don't know whose post, but I've said that quite a bit. This is something that I've struggled with how to talk about because I made posts already where I feel like it sounds really bad saying general ed or special ed. I think that the way you put it is really helpful for me to break down how to address special ed students. So Patrick, the thing is, like, I feel the same way. I do not feel comfortable. I never have. And again, being in education for 20 plus years and being a special education director for, 10, 12 years, I never felt comfortable using the word special education. To this day, I do not feel comfortable using that word, or general education or regular education, because those are exclusive terms. Now, they're in the law. So, in that aspect, you need to use them. But they don't set well with me. They're uncomfortable terms to say because they are by nature just exclusionary terms. So what you're feeling, I feel that too. I still feel that. And I something just, you say the word and it's like, that doesn't resonate well with me. And, I get into second order thinking and I'm like, it doesn't resonate with me because it is very much creating an other. I mean, it's creating categories of students versus more or less talking just about all students are students, and students have different levels of supports that are provided to them. And I think that's kind of it. But yeah, I'm with you though, Patrick. I think the language itself gets to be exclusive in nature and uncomfortable. And I think the best way is just to kind of disregard it. And I mean, it's a student is a student, and I do know districts who have actually done that and they have gotten rid of all terminology related to special education teachers or whatever. I mean, everybody's called like a learning facilitator, and it's actually like on their contracts and stuff like that. Not with the feds. I mean, you still get dollars with IDEA, which is tagged special education, things like that. But I mean, the upfront things of what they do in signage and stuff like that and terminologies, everybody's a learner, and all educators are learning facilitators. So, and this is a part too where, that I think the DPI licensing is behind the times. I just renewed my DPI license this weekend, which I should have gone to the Ringling Brothers Circus in Baraboo on my first graders field trip last week, just to prepare myself to fill out that application because, I'm still under the 6 credits every 5 years plan. And it was ludicrous to do this renewal. I mean, it was just ludicrous because, I have administrative licenses and then also, teaching licenses. So it initially starts out where it looks like it's really great. It's like you put in your information and it identifies you and here's your licenses. I'm like, okay, this is not going to take long. They've got the streamline. All of a sudden it gets in all these wacky channels and then it kind of brings you back to different screens that you were on before. And then before you pay, it's like, oh, by the way, like, you could either get your administrative license and your teaching license. It has to be 2 separate processes, but at the very end before you check out, it's like, by the way, if you want to combine these, go back and do this. I'm like, whoa, I guess I will. Save me a little bit of money. But anyway, I don't know. It also gets restrictive with what you can do with your licensure in Wisconsin. States like Minnesota are much more liberal in saying if you are licensed as a special education teacher, you can work with all students. I don't know how much time, but it's in Wisconsin, it's really meant to be like incidental. Like if you're a special education teacher and you're in the, push-in services in the classroom and you happen to, a regular education student or a student without a disability ask you a question, can you answer that question? Yes. But should you be, helping the students otherwise? Probably not. So, I think Wisconsin is going to be changing and going along with more of the nation in trying to pull the silo approach off of some of these licenses. It's going to be interesting though, because something is going to happen with the way we service children with mental health needs, because right now it's through largely OHI, other health impaired. And, you don't come out, you can have a diagnosis of autism, of educational autism, but you don't have educational anxiety or educational depression or something like that. So something's going to have to budge with licensure to broaden that out more on how to serve students with those types of needs. But anyway, I'd get off a little bit on that topic. Matthew, quoting this from you. I find this very interesting that we are applying the Brown versus Board of Education ruling to special education. It really applies, I guess. I never thought of using it because I thought it was just all about race, but it isn't. It can be applied to all sorts of students, from those who are wheelchair bound to the autistic. Students who have disabilities have the same civil liberties. The rule can be applied to disability just as it was to the segregated South in the 1950s. Absolutely. You're spot on. I'm going to take this a step further. When I was working on my dissertation program down at UW-Madison, so this was probably about 2010, I had a class that was taught by, at that time, Madison Superintendent Art Rainwater, who I have much respect for. And Art was a fabulous storyteller, by the way, absolutely fabulous storyteller. Very, very good superintendent. My opinion, I really respect Art. I thought he was a super bright guy. But anyway, Art Rainwater was teaching this superintendent's class, which I was in. And I have all of my coursework done to be a superintendent, but I never submitted my application, because then I would have had to do the PDP, Professional Development Plan, which I didn't want to do. And I knew I really didn't want to become a superintendent. So, but anyway, Art had us do an assignment, and, this is, we're all administrators at that point, principals, directors, special ed, instruction, whatever. And the assignment had to do with, write about your district's diversity, and I think a description of your district's diversity, and if you were like a new superintendent, what would be your top priority specific to diversity? I don't know, I'm making this up, but it was something like that. So all of us in class, so I don't know, maybe 15 students in this class, we submit our work. Art returns all the papers, and he said, you know what? Every one of you wrote about race. Every single one of you defined diversity as race. Everyone. Nobody defined it as anything else, disability, or socioeconomic, which was a big point that Art kind of was making his point of, of recognizing, students who are living in shelters versus, students who are, living, with very stable family environments, and the diversity that exists there. But he said, you have a very narrow definition of diversity, like all of us did. Like nobody was out of the box on that one. And it was really an eye opener for me and for everybody else, as he explained, just think about diversity. And we had the discussions kind of like you had talked about, Matthew, and you brought up the different interpretations of Brown versus the Board of Ed. And we had those discussions. But again, it's easy to kind of get really narrow in some of these things, like what is diversity, and what are the different ways for diversity to exist. And again, all of us who were acting administrators at the time in that class, we missed it. So Darlene, first of all, Darlene, thank you for experimenting with the different size and styles of fonts. All right, I'm kidding. And I smile at that because, Darlene, I actually built a class in Moodle a couple of years ago. And for some reason, I could not get a font size to change in one module. I don't know what the glitch was, but I couldn't get it to change. So everyone had to endure this crazy fonted module, but the content was still there and solid and things like that. So it happens. So I saw that and I'm like, this has happened to me too. You wrote that remember, no two learners come to the class with the same experiences and skill level. Regular education teachers rely on the expertise of their special education partners to help them modify activities. So I think the point I want to talk about here is, remember, no two learners come to class with the same experiences and skill level. Absolutely. And yet we assume that, well, in testing assumes that, standardized testing assumes that everybody is familiar with, a farm and how a farm operates or something like that. And yet, you might have students who've never been once to a farm. But the more I teach, the more I work in schools, the more I do my radio show, I work on defining terminology and making sure that people kind of have this inter-rater reliability, or students to some extent, of like, okay, do you understand what I'm talking about here? Like, this is what I expect. And it might be in a rubric, it might be demonstrating in showing in a 3D representation or whatever it is, but this is what I'm thinking. So when I say this is what this means. And then have them, talk about, when I say this, what does this mean to you? And to work through that. Because inter-rater reliability, and we addressed this early in class. We talked about mainstreaming, about inclusion, acceptance, tolerance, and things like that. The inter-rater reliability you achieve by defining out those terms is huge. And yet, we have learners, and we don't account for the fact that students come from different backgrounds, different experiences, different biases. And not that bias is a good thing or a bad thing, but just different biases. And just different patterns of how things that they've been exposed to, that they're going to run through different filters in their mind, which all of us do. And that's, it's a big thing with administrators. It's a big thing in high stakes decision making, where I did my dissertation work. And actually NASA, and Top Gun pilots, I worked with, one of the scientists that worked with Top Gun pilots in something that you have to train over and over with pilots in that program is not to pattern, meaning to be very, very aware of the moment something changes from what you expect it to be, and not just that it's going to fall back into this pattern, or that you become complacent. It's like walking home every day. You walk home every day. It's the same exact way, except, the one day that they tar the road over and they put the loose stones and push it down or something like that, and you're walking, and all of a sudden you realize, you fall because it's loose, or you got tar on the bottom of your shoes. I mean, you're not receptive to that change that's gone on. And both those have happened to me, by the way. But so yeah, I've become more aware of students' previous experiences, and try to have that discussion with students, and use examples of saying, this is what I mean when I'm talking about this. Even like the term cold or frio, like I speak Spanish with some of my students, and understanding what my concept of cold is versus their concept of cold, which might mean that we actually go outside, or we open up a window, and is this cold, or is it somewhat cold, or is this calor? Is it warm? Caliente? Is it hot? I mean, so to try to work on that, so I'm like, okay, you think this is warm, I think this is cold. So, but the older I get, I'm wearing sweaters and things like that around work too. So I don't know. I mean, I think I've become cold-blooded, where whatever the temperature is seems to be the temperature of my body. My core drops down, but No, I think that it's really important. You mentioned getting that congruity between experiences and skill level. Courtney wrote, I was struck that 1 in 5 kids ages 13 through 18 have mental health issues each year, although that statistic should be really shocking. My personal experience with middle schoolers supports that claim. Yeah, definitely. It seems that the amount of mental health issues our kids face are increasing every year. That's actually true, statistically true. Every year, I think for the past 8 years, the number one mental diagnosis for youth, or the number one medical diagnosis for youth is anxiety. And that continues to increase. And those students are being categorized in schools then as other health impaired. So that is spiking at a time when LD is decreasing, or SLD, specific learning disability, for the fact that RTI is complicated. Not a lot of people have those systems down well, and it's probably become more realistically of a barrier than anything else. So you just don't have as many students identified SLD. But you do have a number of students who are presenting with mental health needs. And schools are becoming more of a medical model, without a D, and professional development needs to match that. We talk about, I'm going to frame this in inclusion. If you want students to be included, what you do. I mean, we all want that. Okay. But so that's a given. I don't know. So I probably shouldn't have said that, but, to have students included, we need to make sure that our professional development is matching how our students are presenting. So if our students are presenting with mental health needs, we need to have professional development that is helping our teachers to better address that. Not that this all is going to be remedied by teachers. These are very complicated kind of medical model issues. There's something called the Community Health Needs Assessment. You can look it up, and a community health needs assessment. If you go into Google, you type in community health needs assessment plus the hospital that is like close to your school, where, if kids in your school need it to go because they got, strep throat or something that they went to the doctor. If you type that clinic or hospital in, the likelihood is they've done a community health needs assessment. It's required under the Affordable Care Act, and they need to be indicating ways that they're identifying needs of all of the people that they serve, including youth. And for a number of these community health needs assessments, they're starting to partner with schools in helping to help schools meet the mental health needs of kids, which is really cool, because under the community health needs assessment, that is falling on the medical sector to kind of build that bridge over to the school, where we're so used to the school building these bridges out to other places. So just for curiosity's sake, look it up. Maybe look up let's see, Adams Friendship has a really good partnership in their community health needs assessment. I think it's Adams County. I'm going to guess. I know there's some different counties that it crosses, but that's a really good one. Dane County, I think, is evolving that too. But community health needs assessment. But I want to just build off of this. So, you talked about mental health needs, and I'm going to take this from a professional development standpoint. A few years ago, I looked at all of the professional development trainings that staff were attending. Like, we broke down every single one. And then we looked at what our needs were based upon, our student common assessments, test data, our referrals that were coming in for student services. And what we found is we were doing a great job of sending people to trainings in which they had already received prior training, such as, this was the 5th year in a row a teacher attended a training on autism, but yet they hadn't attended one training on mental health or math, which happened to be need areas, per our analysis of what our need areas were. So that's one of those things too, is making sure that your PD is matching what your student population is presenting with. And we do see schools doing programs such as Youth Mental Health First Aid. I went through that myself, found it very helpful. So schools are moving in that direction. But again, when I was a special education director toward the end, I said the title, and I teach a course for aspiring special education directors through Viterbo, Education 655, People Non-Discrimination. And one of the things I say is your title really should be, if it's honest to what the job is, it really should be pupil services, / medical needs coordinator or director in a school, because of the number of students that present with medical needs. And I work with students with high medical needs. And again, nothing to be overwhelmed with. It's just that you need to then receive the professional development and the education and the resources in place to address that. And I know some of you are thinking, I wish I had, those in my school, but I'm coming back. This community health needs assessment is a big step forward in getting a partner to help address mental health needs. And then in that overall helps to promote inclusive practices, because students with anxiety, depression, and other needs are more likely to be able to experience success because their needs are, their mental health related needs are being met. They're then more able to experience success in the quote unquote general education setting, which we've talked about that term before. But Jeremy wrote, I'm curious to learn more about the quote unquote unity that the author wrote about. As far as I can tell, unity isn't as popular of a word in education as inclusion. I hear talk quite often about inclusion, but never about unity. Jeremy, guess what? I'm with you. I'm totally with you on this. This comes into that word salad thing where I don't know what unity, I don't know how I would define unity. The author does not define unity doesn't define it, doesn't give examples. So it becomes one of these terms that can be easily conflated to mean a lot of things. Like we started this class and I did a presentation on mainstreaming, inclusion, acceptance, and tolerance, and also a little bit on non-aggression principle to get an inter-rater reliability to define those terms, to give examples. So when you come up with something like unity, it's like, yeah, I'm not sure what it means. It sounds good. Like we should have unity. We should be unified. But I'm glad you pointed that out, because to me that becomes this whole kind of word salad thing of like you throw terms out there which they frankly confuse people. I mean, and of course it's one of those words at the surface you look at, it's like, well, yeah, I want to be a part of unity. I mean, who wouldn't? But I'm not sure what this means. So Jeremy, I'm complimenting you on pointing that out, because it does introduce again that word salad of, you put some terms out there that are not defined, they become vague, and they can be misinterpreted or conflated with other terms. So, and again, unity is a good example of that. So thanks for doing that. So bringing that up. What I would do, boom, I would just disregard that completely. So, all right. Andrea, my friend Will by Tara Tuchel. I am so glad you were able to read that book. I met Tara right after the book was written, and actually I had run a conference for a few years, and Tara was a presenter, and very popular, and would bring boxes of the book, My Friend Will, and would sell out of them and autograph them. But just a really wonderful book. For those of you listening, My Friend Will it was written from the vantage, the perspective of a young girl, and her friend is Will, and Will has autism. So you were talking about, I'm just going to go in. Some of the students had very good questions about, so using the book, My Friend Will, some of the students had very good questions about how they could help that student with the transition to a new school. If they could offer to help him in class, etc. I've tried to go in a couple of more times since the student started to see if there's more questions or concerns in the class. I believe that having these open conversations has given the other students in the class a better understanding of the student's needs, and they aren't scared of some of the behaviors he displays when he's upset. You're right on. It's an apprehensive nature of like, I don't understand this, or I don't understand what's happening or why it's happening, so I'm going to pull back. And that's all of us do that. Me too. Okay. It's all of us. And once you take the time to educate, and you use literature, and there's so much out there in literature. If you meet with your librarian and say, food allergy is another one, which a ton of books that have to do with food allergy. But you're using literature, which is phenomenal, and you can incorporate this in and then have rich discussions about perspective taking. And, and ask students, like, what questions do you have? Or, be direct. Are you afraid of anything? Is there anything you want to know about this student? My friend Will, if you're using that, then of course it's about the story of Will. I mean, it's this real student, but it's not a student in the class. But for all of us, once we get over that barrier, it gets to be a lot easier, but it's that unknown. And part of it, it's not because people are bad or wanting to be exclusive and shut people out. It's just a lot of times people don't know what to do. Kids figure it out pretty fast, especially if they're younger, but adults don't know exactly how to interact. For example, like Sevanna, when you see the video of Sevanna, it's like, well, does Sevanna get special grading? Should I have the same expectations? What kind of academic rigor should I give to Sevanna? Those type of questions are natural for a teacher to come up. And the moment a student gets identified with a disability, it's statistically proven the expectations go down for that student. Like the other teachers are like, okay, student has a disability. That means they're not going to be able to accomplish as much. So it's like, well, no, it means they have, a disability, and that, with accommodations, or that you might find that through universal design for learning from the student perspective of demonstrating learning, that they cannot write this out or whatever. That is a barrier, but yet, they can communicate this through other means. And, like through creating a video or, whatever it might be. So, but did a nice job. That using your library is a wonderful source. Sit down with the librarian and get books on disability awareness. It's a great way to promote inclusion and ask questions. And it's like those questions where I remember watching some documentary years ago. I mean, it was a long time ago, and it was kids talking to astronauts. And one of the questions like, how do you go to the bathroom, like on the space shuttle? This was back in like 1985 or something. So those awkward questions, but I mean, kids, it's a good question. Like, how does this work? So they kind of, they talked about the astronauts talked about the different things, but it is these types of questions that do kind of come up. And I think you put everything on the table. And once you address those knowledge gaps, you build those bridges. Bonnie, what are the rights of the other children? You wrote, in my school, we have a student that is disruptive every single day to some degree. Most days, he ends up in the office serving an in-school suspension. Many times, there are 3 to 4 adults with him. He is twice as big as his teacher has thrown her around. He repeatedly throws and breaks things. There is a safety issue when this kid, quote, goes off. So it's hard to disagree with your statement. That sounds like a very frightening situation. It also sounds like a situation where the IEP team needs to be reconvened to look at the least restrictive environment and the appropriate placement for that student, because this doesn't sound like this is working. And there's so many factors that go into this, such as, parents who become kind of closed off to an IEP team discussion of an off-site for part of the day, or even, if it's a residential placement, a superintendent might say, there's no way that we're paying that cost. But again, those are all parts of a least restrictive environment, and those need to be considered. I had a student, and again, you do this with the objective of when you have the IEP meeting, the next IEP meeting, hopefully that student is going to be able to progress on that spectrum of a least restrictive environment toward being closer to a general education setting. But they might not get there. I mean, if you have a student with a severe anxiety disorder, it might not happen, and it just doesn't. And for the student that you're describing, I had a student where we actually rented space in the police department and sent a teacher to educate. I have a large cat down here, to educate that student in that setting. Just for the fact that if anything happened with the student, that they had law enforcement close by. I mean, we actually did that. So what you bring up, when things like this don't work, it doesn't help anyone, because this is burnout for a teacher. It's not meeting the needs of that student. It's creating a situation where it's difficult for other students to learn. So learning is compromised kind of on all fronts. So then it really comes back to the school of saying, you do get federal dollars through IDEA, through flow-through. You can claim for additional dollars for high needs, high expense students. And sometimes, that placement is going to be off campus, or sometimes it's going to be residential. If it does get into things like residential and some of these things are happening outside of school, like happening in the home too, the county has an obligation to provide for the needs of its citizens. And I've worked out agreements with counties where I've paid like half the cost and the county's paid half the cost. This will vary county to county and district per district, but I'm saying what you're describing, Bonnie, this is textbook of an IEP team needs to be reconvened to look at the least restrictive environment of the student. So, and I know there's politics and district complications that go into that, and I have a very friendly large cat down here. So, Kirsten, your thoughts at the end of your discussion is exactly what I was thinking when I read this story. This is a quote from you. Adults and children react to people with disabilities so much different. Why is that? I believe it's because children see people who they really are and not who they may look like. I think you're right with that. For the most part, kids haven't learned the biases of society, and they haven't been indoctrinated into that. And we just kind of naturally get those things as we get older. I mean, whether it be our political affiliations and some of our beliefs and what we're for and what. And I want to tell you, there was a rural school district that I worked with when I was with CISA, and they had a kindergarten girl who started. She was adopted from China, completely blind. And this district hadn't had a blind student as long as they could remember. So very rural district, very limited vision, orientation, mobility services, but they did have an aide who got trained in how to braille. And they put the student into this kindergarten classroom. And I was there the first day the student was in this classroom, and I was there quite a bit after that. And the student was immediately accepted by her peers, immediately. And I remember she went over during a playtime to like a sandbox area, and some of the peers like handed toys, put them in her hands, and they helped her kind of find her way around. But then also to the point where the teacher needed to kind of say, this girl can, she can do some of these things on her own, and we need to let her, like find her way around once we kind of get her acclimated. And she would be out on a playground and exploring things. But it was the fact that she was blind meant nothing to how these students interacted with her. She was one of their classmates, and she really, really thrived, and learned, and the teacher also was not hesitant, was very open to, let's give this a try. I believe, the students will react well. I want to learn this. The aid was very much, I want to learn to Braille. I learned how to type Braille. It took a while. I haven't practiced it, so I've lost the fluency that I had in it. But, it is just, basically like 6 keys and 6 dots, different sequences. Like basic Braille. But yeah, so I think what you're talking about is, I found kids to be very accepting, when they have students with special needs who move in. Timothy. Okay, I could talk about everyone's timeline, and they were tremendous. No one had done a Sesame Street timeline. I loved it. Okay, and I also loved Grover, and when Grover would turn into Super Grover. I'm not sure what Grover was all about. What is a Grover? But you talked about how in 1971 some different cultures were represented in characters. Actually, the year I was born, and one of the things right now, I listened to a special, and I think it was on like public radio or something like that, but they were talking about how Sesame Street is evolving to try to mirror society more and more. And they're going to have shows of where, someone is going to talk about, my dad is incarcerated, or my dad's in jail, and, or my mom is in a drug rehab center and stuff like that. And they actually talk about this. So, and while those things are real, I also wonder to what point we get to, like with Sesame Street, of beyond teaching awareness to kind of normalizing situations. What I mean is, like, if you're incarcerated, if you're not following the law, that you got to be, I guess, delicate in how that's portrayed, like through a Sesame Street, that it's recognized, but it's also not condoning that. Yeah, this was something that my dad or my uncle did, and a distinct violation of the law. I don't know. I think Sesame Street is starting to get into some really delicate areas. So you pointed out some really great, I think, cultural education and also of representing characters in wheelchairs and different disabilities, and I think those were definite advances. And now I think Sesame Street is getting into having some really delicate issues. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. But we see a big jump in how disabilities are represented as a parallel here in movies. And I'll give one example. I could give a lot, but one is like Wreck-It Ralph. One of my favorite movies, Wreck-It Ralph. Vanellope, for example, has pixlexia, which is epilepsy. If you look at how it's represented, and Ralph, just being large and just physically, not fitting in. And there's so many different representations throughout that movie that you could get into, like the rich kids, who are in Candy Crush, with their expensive race cars, and Vanellope with, not having, the status. So, these different types of diversity that come into play, and they're really represented well in what is it, the Finding Dory 2 of the octopus that didn't have one of its tentacles, and the whale who had poor vision, and Dory with memory and things like this. So kids movies are doing a really nice job, in my opinion, of representing differences and how to not how to, I guess, be educated about those and not have those as barriers that are insurmountable. And Nemo himself, had the small fin and was, trying to swim up the tube to put the rock in and swim really hard to get back down. But I think the message is right that's coming out. And I'm just going to, there was a documentary that came out in 1983 called Children of Darkness. Okay. And 1983, so filmed at that time. And that had to do with, kids in mental health institutions, and watch that. Wow. Versus like where we're at now for how we represent, disabilities in movies, such a change. And that wasn't a movie, but that documentary is pretty scary, because back in 1983, some of the kids who are represented in that's like my age. The kids that were in there were like my age at that time, 1983. But anyway, nice job. That was a fun timeline, and you did a really nice job with that, Tim. And this will wrap it up. Children must learn to compromise, such as it's an important skill necessary for success in all parts of life. Also, learning to disagree respectfully is something that I've realized is not well understood by many people. This past year has provided many examples of people that haven't mastered the skill. Yeah, absolutely. I have included that now as an IEP goal, that people, students will understand, be able to take the perspectives of different characters and identify those perspectives, and to articulate from those perspectives, because it's not being taught as much anymore. Students are, youth, people in general are becoming more centric. And there's a research study that's been going on for years. I don't know the name of it, but it's fairly famous, and it looks at freshmen coming into college, and it measures how their level of empathy. And anyway, it correlates it back to reading, and basically saying that in the past, 30 years ago, college freshmen, most of them had read more frequently. They had read books. They had taken the perspective of others. By doing that, they had gained empathy, and just less and less were reading today. And they were correlating that out to less empathy. But yeah, I would put that as an IEP goal. I think restorative circles, if you Google the term restorative circles, that's a terrific approach to teaching how to communicate concerns, and then also how to work as a group to reconcile matters when there's disagreements, how to disagree respectfully, and to work to try to bring a resolution to that. So look into that, restorative circles, just Google that. School connectedness, that's a term, school connectedness, again, 2009 CDC study. You can download it, but that has been repeatedly, the concept of school connectedness, or kids connected to school, kids connected to other kids, has been proven as a strong correlate to inclusion. So, yeah, learning to disagree respectfully is something we need to teach kids, because what happens now, what is happening on college campuses is it's aggression. I mean, it's getting to be fights. And also, you talk about this whole thing of teaching, if you disagree. Part of this comes into of teaching the non-aggression principle, meaning that you're not going to aggress against others. It doesn't mean that if something is happening to you that you're not going to defend yourself, or if someone else is getting, quote unquote, like beat up on a playground, that you're not going to step in and try to break that up. But this whole thing of teaching the non-aggression principle, and teaching then the skills of debate. For years, those were taught in schools, and going back to Aristotle, Plato, the skill of debate. And remember, we used to have like the debate teams on TV. I mean, when I was growing up, they used to have those. Like, this is this school's debate team against this school's debate team. And you would then, learn the other team's, or the other person's topic, their position, and try to be able to articulate it as well as they could. So you could intelligently talk about it, and then try to inform them to positions that you don't think that they're seeing, that would help them to see that in a different perspective. Try to be persuasive. But we don't do that anymore. It's either like you agree with me or you're against me. And if we go back to teaching the skill of debate, not the art of debate, the skill of debate, I think it does a lot with how to disagree respectfully and how to help people kids get along better and be more inclusive. So that is it, folks. And I appreciate your time. I know these do get a little bit long, but again, this is, if we were face to face, we would have definitely this time and more that we would be meeting during a week. So if you can listen to the Fireside chats, and you can click that little fast thing on YouTube. And I don't sound like a chipmunk when you do that. But if you listen to this, I think you get a lot out of it. And you can break it up into, different segments. You've all been doing a wonderful job. Continue to be active posters. That's really the big thing, is continue to be active. And if you haven't made posts that have been due, go in and put them in, because if you do start accruing zeros, that's not a good thing. And, there have been people who've gotten to the end of this class and who failed it because they haven't done the work. So I don't want you to be in that spot. Now, granted, I would be contacting you frequently and trying to steer you away from that outcome. But ultimately, it's your responsibility to get the coursework in on time. And I do have the modules, opened up, for you. And it'll be about a week or two, and then I'll open up the rest of the modules so you'll be able to see what's due between now and June 30th. So thank you very much. Have a terrific Module 3 for some of you. This is marking your final week of school. So I still have a little bit longer to go, but and with summer plans, again, look ahead to what's due in class and access class and make sure that you continue to participate. So thank you very much, and yay, we're almost to summer vacation. All right, thank you.